The small town of Brookfield was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Life there was simple, with nothing much happening beyond gossip, local events, and the occasional traffic violation. However, one particular incident would change the town's peaceful reputation forever. It all began on a bright Saturday afternoon. Mrs. Eleanor Grant, a widow in her late 70s, was on her way back from the farmer's market. Eleanor, or Ellie, as the locals called her, was known for her sharp tongue and an independent spirit. Though age had slowed her down, there was something about her piercing blue eyes that made people tread carefully around her. She lived alone in a modest house at the edge of town, spending her days gardening, knitting, and occasionally volunteering at the local library. That afternoon, Eleanor's faded green pickup truck broke down on the side of Harper Street, just outside the local diner. She had just stepped out of the vehicle to inspect the damage when a group of bikers roared into the parking lot nearby. Their leader, a tall, muscular man with a thick black beard and a leather vest, went by the name Rocco. The gang, called Iron Serpents, was infamous for causing trouble in nearby towns, but they were relatively new to Brookfield. Most people avoided crossing their paths. Eleanor, however, wasn't most people. Rocco spotted her struggling to pull out her toolbox from the truck bed and laughed loudly. "Hey, Granny, need a hand?" he hollered mockingly, striding over with a smug grin. The other bikers joined in, parking their motorcycles haphazardly and creating a scene. Eleanor, unfazed by their presence, glanced at Rocco and replied coolly, "Not unless you know how to fix a carburetor. Do you?" The response caught him off guard. He wasn't used to people, especially older women, standing up to him. "Well, aren't you a feisty one?" he sneered, leaning closer. "But maybe you should be careful with that mouth of yours." The bikers surrounded her, laughing and tossing out insults. They joked about her old truck, her faded clothes, and even her age. Eleanor calmly continued inspecting her truck, seemingly unaffected by their mockery. However, her patience began to thin when one of the bikers, a wiry man called Snake, snatched her toolbox and dumped its contents onto the ground. "That was a mistake," Eleanor said, her voice low and firm. Snake laughed, thinking she was joking. "What are you gonna do, Granny? Knit me to death?" The gang erupted into laughter, but Eleanor's icy glare silenced them. "You boys might think this is fun now," she said, standing tall despite her small frame. "But you've just made your first mistake. And trust me, you won't want to make another." Rocco, amused, took a step closer. "Oh yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" Eleanor didn't answer. Instead, she calmly picked up a wrench from the ground and turned back to her truck, ignoring them completely. This enraged Rocco. He hated being dismissed, especially by someone who appeared so defenseless. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," he growled, motioning for his gang to follow him. "But let's see how tough you are when you don't have this piece of junk to hide behind." Before they could do anything more, a patrol car pulled up. Officer Ray Simmons, Brookfield's no-nonsense cop, stepped out and approached the scene. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the gang. Rocco put on an innocent grin. "Just helping the lady with her truck, officer." Eleanor turned to Ray and smirked. "Oh, they've been very helpful, officer. In fact, they've shown me exactly who they are." Ray sensed tension but decided not to press the matter further. "All right, folks, let's disperse. Mrs. Grant, need a ride back home?" "I'll manage," Eleanor said curtly, giving the bikers one last look before getting back into her truck. The bikers revved their engines and roared away, laughing as if they had won. But Eleanor wasn't done. She might have been old, but Eleanor Grant wasn't just a sweet little grandma. Decades ago, she had a past she had worked hard to bury. The Iron Serpents had no idea who they were dealing with, and they were about to find out. The Iron Serpents roared down the road, still laughing at their encounter with Eleanor. They parked their bikes at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Brookfield, their unofficial clubhouse. The gang had used it as their base of operations since they arrived in town 2 weeks earlier, and it was where they planned their illegal activities: petty theft, intimidation, and occasionally worse. Rocco leaned against his bike, lighting a cigarette. "Did you see her face?" That old hag thought she could scare us, he scoffed. Snake chuckled nervously. Yeah, but there was something about her. She didn't act like the usual scared locals. Rocco rolled his eyes. She's a cranky old woman, Snake. Stop acting like she's the boogeyman. Meanwhile, back in town, Eleanor sat in her dimly lit kitchen, sipping a cup of tea. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. She knew the type, men who thrived on fear, who mistook kindness for weakness. She had dealt with their kind before. Decades ago, in her younger years, Eleanor had been married to a man named Martin Grant, a decorated officer in the military. Together, they had spent years learning survival skills, tactics, and resilience. Eleanor smirked as she thought of Rocco and his gang. They have no idea what's coming. The next day, the bikers returned to town. Their loud engines broke the Sunday morning calm, turning heads and making people nervous. They parked near the diner and swaggered inside, taking over a booth in the corner. The waitstaff, clearly uncomfortable, took their orders while trying to avoid eye contact. Just as they began eating, the door creaked open. Eleanor walked in carrying a small paper bag. She ignored the bikers and headed straight for the counter, chatting briefly with the owner, Mr. Miller. Rocco watched her with a smirk. Well, if it isn't Granny Grit. Come to join us for breakfast. Eleanor didn't even glance in his direction. She placed the paper bag on the counter and said, "This is for your granddaughter, Mr. Miller. I knitted her a scarf for the winter." The owner thanked her warmly before she turned to leave. As she passed the biker's table, Rocco reached out and grabbed her wrist. The diner went silent. "You forgot to say good morning, Granny," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Eleanor looked down at his hand, her expression calm but her eyes cold. "Let go," she said evenly. The tension in the air was palpable. For a moment, it seemed like Rocco might press further, but something in her gaze made him hesitate. He released her wrist, laughing as if it was all a joke. "Relax, we're just having fun." Eleanor stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Enjoy your fun while it lasts." With that, she walked out, leaving the gang to exchange uneasy glances. Later that night, as the gang gathered at their warehouse, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered erratically, plunging the room into darkness every few seconds. The sound of tires screeching outside startled them, but when they looked out, the lot was empty. Then, a loud bang echoed from the back of the building. "What was that?" Snake asked, gripping a wrench like a weapon. Rocco scowled. "Relax. It's probably just some kids messing around." But as the noises grew louder and closer, even Rocco began to feel uneasy. They searched the property, finding nothing but the growing sense that they were being watched. Finally, they returned inside, locking the doors behind them. On the wall opposite the main door, someone had painted a message in bold red letters. "Learn respect or face consequences." Rocco's face turned pale. He ripped the note down, muttering, "Whoever did this is dead." Snake spoke up, his voice shaky. "You think it's her? Don't be stupid." Rocco barked, but the doubt in his tone didn't go unnoticed. Little did they know, Eleanor wasn't just trying to scare them. She was testing their limits, studying their movements, and planning her next move. For now, she wanted them nervous. By the time they realized the storm they had unleashed, it would already be too late. The iron serpents didn't sleep well that night. The ominous warning painted on their warehouse wall rattled them, though none of them dared admit it. By morning, Rocco had regained his bravado. He gathered the gang and made a fiery declaration. "We don't back down from threats, especially not from some crazy old woman," he snarled. "If she wants a fight, we'll give her one." Snake, ever the cautious one, hesitated. "But what if it's not just her? What if she's got connections? Maybe this town isn't as sleepy as it looks." Rocco glared at him. "If you're scared, you can leave. But I'm not letting some grandma make fools of us." The gang rallied behind their leader, their fear turning into anger. They decided to confront Eleanor directly, to make it clear that she had messed with the wrong people. Eleanor, meanwhile, was in her garden, tending to her roses. Her yard was immaculate, each flower bed a testament to her meticulous nature. She had spent the morning sharpening her tools, not just for gardening. She knew the bikers would retaliate, and she was ready. At midday, the roar of motorcycles shattered the peace. Eleanor looked up from her work as the iron serpents pulled up in front of her house, their bikes kicking up dust. Rocco dismounted and marched up her driveway, flanked by Snake and two others. "Mrs. Grant," Rocco called out, his tone mockingly polite. "We thought we'd pay you a visit. You know, neighborly courtesy and all." Eleanor straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're trespassing," she said calmly. Rocco smirked. "Oh, come on. Don't be like that. We just want to talk." She stepped closer, her piercing blue eyes meeting his. "Talk then. But choose your words wisely." Rocco faltered for a second but quickly masked it with bravado. "That little stunt at our place last night? Real cute. But let me make one thing clear. We're not scared of you." Eleanor tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Who said I wanted you scared? Maybe I just wanted to get your attention." "Well, you've got it," Rocco said, stepping closer. "Now, how about you apologize for sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" Eleanor crossed her arms, unfazed. "And if I don't?" Rocco's grin faded. "Then we'll make sure you regret it." The other bikers chuckled nervously, but their laughter died when Eleanor took a step forward, closing the gap between herself and Rocco. Despite her small frame, there was something intimidating about her presence. "You've already made one mistake," she said, her voice low and steady. "Threatening me is the second. Do you really want to make a third?" Rocco's jaw tightened. "You think you're untouchable because you're old? You've got no idea who you're messing with. And you've got no idea who you're dealing with," Eleanor shot back. The tension was electric. Snake shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the others as if seeking reassurance. Before Rocco could respond, Eleanor turned and walked toward her porch. She picked up a metal watering can, filled it from the hose, and began watering her roses as if the bikers weren't even there. "I'm done talking," she called over her shoulder. "If you boys don't leave now, you'll wish you had." Rocco clenched his fists, furious at being dismissed. "We're not done here." "Oh, I know," Eleanor replied without looking up. "But you will be soon enough." Her calm confidence unnerved the gang. After a few more moments of awkward silence, Rocco barked, "Let's go." The bikers reluctantly followed him back to their bikes, throwing glares at Eleanor as they left. That evening, the gang tried to shake off the encounter by drinking and playing pool at the local dive bar. But the tension lingered, especially for Snake, who couldn't stop replaying Eleanor's warning in his mind. As the night wore on, their bikes, parked outside in a neat row, became the target of an unseen hand. When the gang finally stumbled out of the bar, they found their tires slashed, handlebars smeared with what looked like grease, and one of the bikes completely tipped over. A note was taped to Rocco's bike. "Last chance to walk away." Rocco crumpled the note in his fist, his face red with rage. "That's it. She's gone too far." But Snake's voice wavered as he asked, "Are we sure it's just her? What if she has someone helping her?" Rocco glared at him. "I don't care if it's her or the whole damn town. Tomorrow we end this." As the gang fumed over the latest humiliation, Eleanor sat in her living room, sipping tea and reviewing an old, dusty journal. Inside were notes, maps, and plans, reminders of a life she thought she had left behind. "If they want to fight," she muttered to herself, "I'll give them one they'll never forget." The morning after the bikers found their bikes sabotaged, Rocco stormed into the local hardware store, his face twisted with fury. He slammed a fist on the counter, startling the cashier, an older man named Jim. "Where's the phone book, Jim? I need the number for a towing company." Jim hesitated, sensing the danger in Rocco's tone, but handed him the phone book with a nervous smile. "You boys need anything else?" Rocco ignored the question, his mind already set. He wasn't about to let some old woman outsmart him. By the time he left the store, he had found the number he needed. Later that morning, the iron serpents gathered at the warehouse. Rocco had arranged for a tow truck to bring in a motorcycle they had borrowed from another town. A fast, powerful machine that would make sure Eleanor would regret crossing them. He was done with her games. At noon, the gang rolled up to Eleanor's house again, this time with a plan. Rocco ordered the others to park their bikes at a distance and approached her front door with the borrowed motorcycle. Eleanor, hearing the loud roar of the engine, stood at her window and watched as Rocco walked up her driveway, his face hard and determined. Without saying a word, Rocco took a crowbar from his belt and swung it at the front gate. It flew open with a loud crack. He stepped onto her porch, eyes glinting with rage. "This is your last chance, Granny," he said. "Leave town or there will be consequences." Eleanor stepped outside, unfazed. "Consequences? Is that what you're calling it now?" Rocco raised the crowbar menacingly. "You don't get to keep pushing us around. We're done with you." For a brief moment, Eleanor's eyes flickered with something deeper, something no one could quite place. "I gave you a chance," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "And now you'll regret ignoring it." Without warning, Eleanor reached into her porch swing, grabbing a small, heavy-looking object. Rocco barely had time to react as she swung it directly at his feet, causing him to stumble backward. "What the hell?" Rocco gasped, looking down to see a metal rod in her hand. He quickly regained his stance and charged at her, but before he could get too close, Eleanor dropped to a low stance and thrust the rod toward his chest, knocking the wind out of him. "Get off my property," she demanded. The gang stood in disbelief, unsure of what they were witnessing. Rocco, now on the ground, gasped for air and held up a hand to his gang. "Wait. Hold on," he wheezed. Eleanor stepped back, her face unreadable. "This was never about winning a fight. It was about making sure you understood the rules." Rocco looked up at her, his pride bruised. "You're insane, lady." "No," she interrupted. "You'll leave. Now." The bikers quickly retreated, but Rocco wasn't done. He was humiliated, and revenge burned inside him like a fire. The last thing he could let go of was his pride. He couldn't stand the idea of Eleanor having the upper hand. That night, as he sat brooding in his favorite booth at the bar, Snake looked nervously at his leader. "Maybe it's over. She's not someone to mess with. We're not getting anywhere with this." Rocco scowled, throwing back his drink. "You want to walk away from this, Snake? Fine. But I'm not going down like this. I'm going to make her pay." The next day, Rocco and a few of the gang members returned to Eleanor's house with a new plan. They would vandalize her property, push her into a corner, and show her that they were the ones in charge. As they approached her driveway, they noticed something unusual. The front door of Eleanor's house was wide open, and there was a strange quietness in the air. The motorcycles parked nearby, their engines silent, gave off a chilling aura. Rocco motioned for the others to follow him cautiously, but when they reached the porch, they stopped in their tracks. Eleanor stood there, but she wasn't holding any tools or weapons. Instead, her expression was calm, almost serene. In her hands, she held a small box. "You boys still don't get it, do you?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. Rocco was about to make a snide comment when Eleanor opened the box and revealed what was inside. A series of old photographs. The bikers froze. The pictures showed Rocco, young, eager, and very different from the hardened man he was now, standing beside Eleanor. They were close, even laughing together in one of the photos. The pictures seemed to be taken decades ago, but the faces were unmistakable. Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke. "You were once a different man, Rocco. But that was before you let your pride control you. These were taken before you joined the Iron Serpents. Before you chose this path." Rocco's blood ran cold. The memories flooded back, but he refused to let them show on his face. "I didn't know you remembered," he said, his voice low. Eleanor gave him a sad smile. "I've never forgotten. I was there when you made your choices. But I'm not the woman you remember. And you're no longer the man I once knew." The silence hung thick in the air as Rocco looked at the photos in disbelief. He had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. That evening, the Iron Serpents gathered once again, but this time, something had shifted. The confidence they once had in bullying and terrorizing the town had cracked. They felt the weight of their actions like never before. Rocco sat alone in the back of the warehouse, staring at the photos Eleanor had shown him. The old life, the person he used to be, seemed so distant now. The gang had crossed a line they couldn't take back. Snake entered the room, his face uneasy. "We need to leave this town, Rocco. It's gone too far." Rocco's voice was quiet, almost defeated. "I never thought she'd bring up those days. But maybe she was right. Maybe we've all forgotten who we used to be." For the first time, Rocco saw himself through Eleanor's eyes. Not the man he had become, but the man he had once been, before the gang, before the violence. The next morning, the Iron Serpents packed up and left Brookfield without a word. They didn't know where they were going. But it didn't matter. The lessons of the past had caught up with them. As for Eleanor, she returned to her quiet life. The bikers never returned, and the town of Brookfield went back to its peaceful routine. But everyone who had witnessed what happened knew one thing for certain. No one ever messed with Eleanor Grant again.